Hi, this is Esther Camacho, and welcome to another Quarantine Genealogy. Today we're going to talk about vital records. So, what are vital records? Well, they are government issued records that document life events. Those include birth, marriage, death, divorce, and wills. So, who records vital records? Well, the government or civil records, the local, state, in Texas, started requiring that we register all vital records starting in 1903. And you also have church records, which includes baptismals, marriage, funeral service, and any type of burial information. But before we go any further, let me talk about primary and secondary sources. Now, our primary sources are documents or records that were written or created at the time of the event, and those include your birth, marriage, and death, because those are the ones that are recorded right after it's happened. On the other hand, secondary sources are documents that were created at a later time, not at the time of the events. Those include like old letters, information in books, oral interviews. Sometimes the census records can be considered secondary and not a primary source only because of the information it has, because we look at those as a guide, as not as a fact. Another thing to consider is a death certificate. It is both a primary and secondary source, and we'll look at that in another slide. Now, our birth records, make sure that you read each line carefully. You want to look at all this information just to get what's there. This one right here, it shows that this is one of twins. Now, marriage records, know that it doesn't always have the parents listed on there, but it does on a church record. You can have one or both. You can have a church record as well as a civil or government record. Now, when you look at marriage records, now the civil records is the one that you see on the left. That is the one that's done by this your municipality where you're getting married. Same thing with the church. But the difference between the church and the civil is the civil, it gives you just the basic information, who they are, what time they went in to record this, and to go get married and to bring it back so they can record it in the records. Now, when you look at a church record, it gives you the same information, but a little bit more. Most of the times it's going to tell you who the parents were, where they were from. This one says he was a native of Maryland. She was a native of Louisiana. That is not what you're going to see in a civil record. So a church record has just a little bit more information that can provide you with the clues as to where can I find the family? And on this document, it also lists that she was married before and that he had died in Brownsville, and I believe that's 1866. So now we know that she was married before. Now we can do a little bit of research to find out who he was, where they got married, and their information if they had any children. Death records, make sure again you read through each record carefully. You know, they come in various shapes. They're not always complete, but most of them are, but there are times when they're not. So when you look at one, you're just going to read it from top to bottom. And you'll notice the name of the deceased, who the parents were, who the informant is, the cause of death, and the time of death and the burial location, which is also very important. Now, when you look at this record, and this is a good example where you have some misleading names. If you look at her name, it is Lucy Collins Tagle. Of course, she died in 1967. And it's got her middle name is Collins and her last name is Tagle, and that's her married name. But you look down at the father and it shows that he is Lafayette Davis. So you don't see that in her name at all. You look at the informant, it's got Jesse Collins. So who is this person? Why is her name very different? And I look at the middle initial, it's I, so there is no D in there. Was that a mistake? Or was I Ida, a middle name? But on this record, it shows Collins to be the middle name. So I had to do a little bit more research because I was trying to figure out where this comes in. Jesse Collins, the informant, was her son. And Collins is from her first husband, and he had died. Dagle was from the second husband. Now, if you notice, it shows that she's a widowed. Well, she's not a widowed of Dagle because he survived her. They were divorced. She was a widow of Collins. So it takes a little bit of research to go in there to try to sort this out as to why it's like that. It's correct. That's the way they have it, but you have to go in there and find the history as to why it's like that, why Davis isn't included. And this could be the informant doing this because his last name is Collins. Of course, here is one that is not complete. Again, you're going to have to look at it and try to get out as much information from it as possible. It does tell me this is one of twins. Of course, it doesn't tell me the cause of death. And unfortunately, it doesn't even give me a burial location. I'm assuming that it is in the city that they lived in and that this child was buried in the local cemetery, but unfortunately they don't list it here. I'm not even sure if he was buried the day of death or the day after. It's just something we'll never know. And of course, if you can't find any type of information, you can't find a birth, marriage, or death, do not forget you can go to the newspaper and look at the announcements that they have, because this could be your only clue for an ancestor that they had died in town. Whether it was in a car crash or they were killed, or there's a birth announcement. Oh, Miss Jane Smith just had a baby last week. If you figure the dates and you go, no, this is, my grandmother, that may be your only clue to a birth record. So if you can't find them, look for newspaper announcements. And resolving conflicts with records, always ask yourself, which record is most likely correct? If you're looking for a date of birth, don't rely just on the census. Look at the baptismal. If it's their birth record, then you know that that's what you need. But if you don't have it, don't totally rely on the death record because it can be incorrect. Or the cemetery marker. That could be someone out there etched the wrong date in there, and you see that a lot. Same thing with marriage. Look at newspaper announcements. Don't rely on Bibles because someone's writing that in from memory. Same thing with the date of death. You have the death record that actually has that information, but if you don't have a death record, look at the other items and go, okay, which one's most likely correct? And then try to work with that. Again, thank you for watching. This is Esther Camacho. So next time in Quarantine Genealogy, let's look at cemetery research. Goodbye.